Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's Place Scrutiny Committee. The date is Wednesday, the 19th of April. We'll start with introductions. So my name is County Councillor Lisa Dimmock for Portskewett Ward, and I am the chair of this committee. If I can go to members first, please. Councillor Brown.
Good afternoon, County Councillor Louise Brown and a member of this committee representing Shire Newton Ward. Thank you.
Councillor Bryn.
Prynawn da, Emma Bryn, representing Wysham Ward in Monmouth.
Councillor Callard.
Councillor Ben Callard, a member of this committee representing Llanfaes Fawr and Gyfallen.
Councillor Davis.
Hello all, Councillor Thomas David Davis, Councillor for Llanfaes Fawr and Gyfallen.
Thank you. Councillor Lucas.
Hi, my name's Councillor Jane Lucas. I'm councillor for your ward in Osbaston for Monmouth.
Councillor McConnell.
Councillor Sue McConnell, a member of this committee, and I represent Cressonon Ward in Abergavenny.
Councillor Stevens.
Good afternoon, Councillor Maria Stevens, a member of this committee from Severn Ward, Caldicot.
And Councillor Strong.
Good afternoon, Councillor Jackie Strong from Caldicot Cross and a member of this committee.
Okay, and I understand we've got some cabinet members with us. So we've got Councillor Fuchs.
Yeah, Prynhandar Pawb. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Catherine Fuchs. I'm here in my capacity as ward member for Town Ward in Monmouth, which Monnow Street falls under. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
I understand we've got Councillor Maybe attending as well today. Is she on?
She'll be joining a little later, Chair, from another meeting.
Okay, lovely. And we've got Councillor Griffiths, who's going to be presenting 2 reports.
Hi, I'm Councillor Paul Griffiths. I represent Chepstow Castle and Larkfield, and I'm Deputy Leader.
Okay, thank you. And officers, do you want to introduce yourselves? Do you want a scrutiny? Okay.
Who wants to start?
You can start, Dave.
Okay, thanks. Dave Jones, Head of Public Protection. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hugh Owen, Principal Environmental Health Officer.
Good afternoon, Francis O'Brien, Chief Officer, Communities in Place.
Hello, Daniel Fordham, Regeneration Manager.
Claire Sullivan, Regeneration Project Manager.
And Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy, Performance and Scrutiny.
And I'm Hazel, and I support the scrutiny process.
And Robert, Scrutiny and Policy Officer.
Lovely. I believe we've only had one apologies for absence, which is Councillor Ian Chandler. And declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest they want to raise? Yes, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I just wish to declare a personal interest in relation to the petition that's before this committee this afternoon, and would refer members to my register of interests.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we've got the public open forum, which includes item 4, the petition from Osbaston Primary School. And I understand we've got 2 very important visitors in the chamber today, sat at the front, Fionn and Charlotte. Have you been shown how to use the microphones? You want to say hello quickly?
Hello.
You're working?
Hello.
It's lovely to have you both here. Jane, would you like to introduce Charlotte and Fionn?
I certainly would love to. Good afternoon. Today we're very lucky, and thank you very much everybody for allowing Fionn and Charlotte and their mum Jenny to accompany them to come forward and present a petition on single-use plastic bags. Would like very much for them to be heard and welcomed, which we all obviously would, and I hope that they will set forth and tell us all about it, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, Fionn, are you ready to speak?
Yes. Hello, my name is Fionn Mayment Cardners, and I have created a petition for the polar bears because the polar bears are suffering of a crime that they haven't committed. Now, to get to the root of this problem, I have to talk about climate change. Climate change is caused by carbon, and single-use plastic bags contains carbon. As single-use plastic cannot be recycled, the carbon gets released and goes into the air, creating a thick and warm blanket that wraps itself around the Earth. And that is what has been destroying polar bears' homes and ice. And I want to change that because the polar bears deserve a better and brighter future. Because, like I said, the polar bears are suffering of a crime that they haven't committed. So, with my petition, I went out and I asked a couple of my classmates of what they think of my idea. But they weren't keen and said no. But that did not make me quit. I went again, and finally, my brother told his teacher about my work, and moments later, I had 31 signatures on my petition.
Thank you, Fionn. Have you finished now?
Yes.
Thank you very much. You spoke perfectly. I think we should refer this to the cabinet member who is responsible for this item. Councillor Maybe, sorry, would you like to come in there?
Thank you very much, Lisa. Yeah, and I'd just like to thank both of you for this petition. It's very, very important, and I'm really pleased that you're concerned about this issue, and we'll take it very seriously indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maybe. I'd like to thank Fionn and Charlotte from Osbaston School for their petition and for attending County Hall today. As we know, MCC works very hard at becoming a plastic-free county. We're making huge changes, so we're changing from small pint plastic bottles for school to milk glass bottles from Raglan Dairy. We are stopping using throwaway pink and purple plastic bags and are changing to reusable bags for recycling. That's the Hessian sacks. I've just had an update. We currently have approximately 10,000 households on reusable bags, with another 5,000 planned for the rollout in the next couple of months. And we aim to cover the whole of the county by the end of the year. So that's something for us all to look forward to. So I'd like to thank Fionn and Charlotte for attending today, and Jenny for bringing them. And we need more people like you both attending County Hall. We are eager to hear from our young residents and your fresh and new ideas. So thank you ever so much. By all means, you are more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but you're also welcome to leave, okay? Thank you.
Chair, I think our guests have got some badges that they'd like to distribute to people in the chamber, if you would allow us to do that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, so just give us a few moments.
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Would it be possible for them to leave a badge for me for tomorrow, please? I don't know if they heard me.
Yeah, Chair, if you don't mind me just sort of coming in there. Yeah, Matt Gatehouse, Head of Policy and Performance. I know that Fionn and Charlotte have got enough badges, I think, for all of those members who are dialing into the committee remotely. So we'll arrange for them to be left in the members' lounge so you can pick them up when you're coming for council tomorrow.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. I think we found some future councillors who will be sat here one day.
Is that right?
I just realised everybody was looking at a blank screen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. The girls have left now, so.
Oh, lovely. Thank you ever so much. I've just noticed as well that we've got another cabinet member who's joined us, and that's Councillor Birch. Sorry, Sarah, I totally missed you there. Do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Sarah Birch, councillor for Cantref Ward and cabinet member for Inclusive and Active Communities. Looking forward to hearing your views on the dog fouling questions with regard to my responsibilities for rights of way and mon-life sites.
Thank you. Okay, so that we'll move swiftly on to item 5, Public Spaces Protection Order, PSPO. For dog controls, for members to inform how to proceed with the next stages of the draft PSPO. I know that we've got Hugh with us, but we've also got Cabinet Member Councillor Griffiths, who I believe is going to be presenting the report, and we've also got Dave Jones sat at the front as well. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Thanks, Chair. I'm not going to present the report. I'm going to provide an introduction as the responsible cabinet member. The presentation of the report will be through Hugh and David. And what I've learned since taking my responsibility in this cabinet post is that work on this report has been going on for several years and was interrupted in part by the pandemic. And now we're bringing forward the report to this committee. The objective, I believe, is to build a consensus on how we take this order forward. And in order to achieve that consensus, I regard the contribution of the Scrutiny Committee as essential. We all recognise that dog ownership adds to the quality of life for very many people. I spent 20 years as a dog owner and remember my dogs with fondness. But we also recognise that dog owners like me need to act responsibly and not allow dog faeces to create risk or nuisance to others. Before the pandemic, the Council had consulted on creating a protection order which would create dog exclusion zones, so areas which would be defined where dogs were not allowed. They may include play areas, sports fields. We'd consulted on The idea of a dog on leash area, and the example that's illustrated for me when it was explained would be perhaps a cemetery. You would want perhaps the public to take their dog to a cemetery, but not for that dog to run freely around that area. The report goes beyond the pre-pandemic consultation and also introduces the option of creating an offence for not carrying the appropriate means of collecting dog faeces. I am aware that probably most of Wales has these provisions in place. We're not leading the way, but we can learn from others as we propose and develop these proposals. So I'd like us to make progress, but to do so by working with this committee to create the consensus that we need to achieve. Your discussions today will inform another round of public engagement and public consultation. Following that, we'll come back to this committee, and only then will there be a report to Cabinet, subject once more to this committee's pre-decision scrutiny. So your involvement will be there at each stage. That's important because I think we can only make progress with public consensus on this matter. So over to Hugh and David.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Some background for members to help set the context for this report. As Councillor Griffiths said, it's been 2 or 3 years in development, so I think the context will be helpful. Currently, Council has a designation order made under the Dogs Fouling of Land Act 1996, which makes it an offence for a dog owner not to pick up dog mess if it fouls certain designated areas under the order. These designated areas are typically urban areas, roads where the speed limits are less than 40 miles an hour, play areas, etc. In addition, we have the Give Dog Fouling the Red Card Working Group. That's been going for about 7 or 8 years, and I've chaired it for much of that. For members who are not aware of the work, of very good work that group does, it's close working between the County Council and in particular Waste and Street Cleaning sections, environmental health, and the town and community councils who attend. Emphasis here is very much on sharing resource, maximising results, and trying to change behaviour of a very few, it should be acknowledged, who don't pick up dog mess by raising awareness. This collaborative working is certainly a positive contribution, and it's our intention to continue to build on the work done. Indeed, the need to explore what else can be done to help raise awareness and take full advantage of the legislation at the Council's disposal very much comes out of a collaborative working we've been doing with the town and community councils through Give Dog Fouling a Red Card. Public spaces protection orders provide the opportunity to set the dog controls we want in the public spaces in the county. But setting the controls in public spaces has to be very much in collaboration and in agreement with our communities, represented of course by our town and community councils and the major landowners responsible for public spaces, such as the registered social landlords, such as Monmouthshire Housing Association, Brecon Beacons National Park, Cadw, Woodland Trust, etc., etc. So as the report outlines, we are deep in this process and close to delivering to scrutiny a draft public space protection order for consideration, which hopefully will be towards the end of May. In order to help us deliver a draft order, it's necessary to agree certain matters at this time, which will help focus our work in the weeks ahead. So these, coming on to the recommendations of the report, these pertinent points are, firstly, to remind members, as provided in key issues 3.3, that in Strong Community Select March 2022, it was endorsed that a draft order will include, for the offence of a person in charge of a dog when in a public space in the county failing to put a dog on a lead of no more than 2 metres length when directed to do so by an authorised officer, where the dog is considered to be out of control or causing alarm or distress or to prevent a nuisance. So that's been endorsed by Stronger Communities in March 2022, so that will be included in the draft order. So moving on to the recommendations. Point 2.1. Members endorse a proposal for a draft order to include for the offence of a person in charge of a dog that is defecated on a public space, failing to pick up, as provided also in 3.8. Certainly from my environmental health, public health perspective, this is of fundamental importance. And from the consultations that we've undertaken, meets widespread agreement. In other words, if a dog fouls a public space in the county, the dog owner should pick it up after them. And if they don't, the draft order, the public space protection order would make it an offence. Point recommendation 2.2 is for members' consideration. The potential inclusion in a draft PSPO of an offence if a dog owner does not have a means for picking up dog mess when approached by an authorised officer. So if this goes on further than an authorised officer witnessing the person not picking up after a dog, but an authorised officer, perhaps, for example, working on intelligence that some particular dog owner does not pick up, and then without having to wait to see if that dog fouls, approaching that person and saying, well, if your dog does foul, you're walking a dog in a public space, if your dog does foul, do you have a means to pick up the mess? In other words, asking for dog bags, to show them the dog bags. So that's for members' consideration as to whether or not they consider that has merit to include in a draft order. I've provided some context, some background information on the position of other local authorities in Wales to help members consider this in 3.12. And it may be worth me just reading that. 15 of the 22 Welsh local authorities have a public space protection order for dog controls. And of those 15, 8 make it an offence if a dog owner does not carry an appropriate receptacle or bag. So that's the second recommendation. Moving on to recommendation 2.3. As provided in paragraphs 3.13 to 3.20, dogs on leads and dog exclusion areas bear a lot of consideration. And this has been clear from the consultation replies, the wide range of consultation replies that we've received to date. This report very much cross-cuts a number of directorates, and it is proposed at this time that exclusion areas include marked sports pitches, children's play areas, schools and leisure centre fields. It's also proposed that leads areas, dogs and leads areas, to include open cemeteries and skate parks. There are also a number of other areas proposed at this time by town and community councils and other stakeholders responsible for public spaces. So we very much engaged, as provided in 2.3 and in the key matters, we're very much engaged with town and community councils at this time in agreeing a list of dogs and leads and dog exemption areas, so we can move forward with a consensus of areas for a draft PSPO, hopefully again to scrutiny towards the end of May. And 2.3 is asking for members to endorse and comment on the current position and the way forward we are taking this. These are the main points. And as I've alluded to and provided in 2.4, the intention is for us then to deliver a draft PSPO to scrutiny towards the end of May for consideration prior to going to public consultation. A public consultation is probably going to be 2 months, which we would hope to go in June, early July to public and to key stakeholders. Following public consultation, as Councillor Griffiths outlined, we will then look to report back to scrutiny with a final PSPO taken on board the results of the consultation for pre-decision scrutiny. This, I suggest, will be in Q3 of this financial year. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. So members, the hand up facility is now in the chat bar. So if you could please click the raise hand and then we can put your questions to officers. Okay, I've got Councillor McConnell first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your contributions and this report. I'm after this afternoon. I'll be going on this evening to the Lantilio Potholi Community Council, and I've been working quite hard with them on this problem, and they've been working hard. They'll be quite encouraged to hear this discussion and see this report, and I'm sure they will take an active part in the public consultation when that comes round. So I'll be able to brief them this evening. I would like to praise what they've done. We've leafleted the whole community to raise awareness. The Any Bin Will Do was a really useful. I think people thought you really did have to look for the dog bin, and so that's been quite useful. I would endorse all of these comments, and as a very doting dog owner myself, and also an enjoyer of the green spaces, I can endorse the recommendations in this report, and I can even put my hand in my pocket and find some dog bags because they're always there. It's not a big ask really, and they don't use that much space. My only comment to this, other than being very much in favour of the direction of travel, is that we can pass any laws, and I say this on various fronts, we can pass any laws we like and any rules that we like, we can impose any, we can establish any fines or that we like. It's the enforcement which proves always to be the challenge, and the method by which we enforce is always the challenge, and whether we have the resources and the power to do the personal power to do that as to how much of an impact this makes. So that is always my concern about these things, is not the passing of a praiseworthy law, it's how we enforce it in the end. So that would be my question, I guess, as much as my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McConnell. Hugh, would you like to answer?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, some very good points, Councillor. First thing I would say is going through this PSPO process is extremely helpful because it raises awareness constantly in members of the public mind as to you should be picking up, where should I be taking my dog, etc. So I think that has benefit. Secondly, I'd make the point that if we do declare any dogs on needs exemption areas, they will be appropriately signposted, and the signage again will raise awareness. So if you're entering a play area, you will see a sign to say dog exemption area, for example, if that's agreed in the final PSPO. And I think again that's important because it raises awareness as to what people should and shouldn't be doing. But then we do obviously come to the position of enforcement, and producing a PSPO inevitably has increases expectations. Certainly what's not going to be the case is we're not going to have so many authorised officers around that wherever an offence is committed, but the dog owner is pounced on and given a fixed penalty notice. I would suggest it's to be considered as we're moving forward, and again, potentially in our end of May report when we present the draft PSPO. But I would suggest one option, as is the current position, is for authorisations to be spread across a number of departments or a number of directorates. This really is cross-cutting. It covers land covered by the estate section, leisure department, waste and street cleaning certainly have a significant interest. And there's no reason why we can't have authorised officers in a number of these departments. We also have the civil parking enforcement officers who do carry out proactive patrolling of our car parks, etc. And there's conversations already been held, taking place, but they may also be authorised. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Could I just briefly add as well? I think you'll remember in the budget cycle, isn't it, reference to review of littering and fly tipping, so that would certainly form part of that review. That's what we're doing currently, well, the issues in terms of FPNs and the capacity, so that's bound to come through that review. But as Hugh says, we're also the police officers themselves, so we went through dog filing, which is currently an FPN offence. The local PSPOs were also the community support officers were trained up as well. So we'll, as and when this progresses, we certainly need to address the enforcement issue. As you say, if you've got a set of rules and regs, if we haven't got enough people to actually be out in parks and following up complaints as well, then clearly that will is number one, it's important, but secondly, I think the review will flag that up through this year as well.
Thank you. I've got one final point I didn't mean to make. Apologies. Dog owners are very much creatures of habit, and they tend to walk up dogs, same place, etc. And officers really are working on intelligence. So if we get reports, as Dave touched on, complaints, so-and-so is not picking up in such a location, that enables then an authorised officer to be present around about that time. So hopefully that will help as well.
Thank you, officers, and thank you, Councillor McConnell, for your question. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, and thank you for that presentation. How would the new controls, if they're brought in, affect trustees of land? And I'm speaking as a resident of Caldicot, and we have a beautiful park which we as a town council, we are trustees of that land, of fields and trusts, parks and open spaces. So would we be able to have the same control on our piece of land in Caldicot? Because the land itself has got children's play park, an adults exercise equipment, and also it's a football and sports pitch. So how would any new controls affect that? Would the restrictions still be able to apply to a trustee's land?
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. So where we're at the moment, and as put in recommendation 2.3, we've sent a correspondence to all town and community councils setting out the dogs on leads and dogs exemption areas proposed for each town and community council. So for Caldicot, that may include, for example, the areas that you've suggested, Councillor Stevens. And that really is then for the town and community council to come back and either agree or disagree with what the council is proposing. So there may be legitimate issues and concerns that the town and community council wants to put forward, such as whether this land is in trust, how will it affect us, etc. And that will need to be that detail will need to be considered on a case-by-case basis. But ultimately, if a play area, for example, or a park or a field is included in a PSPO, what it does is make it an offence to breach whatever it says in the offence, either to take your dog on there or not keep the dog on a lead. So beyond that, it should not affect the trust's control of the land. But as I said, the stage we're at this moment is for the town and community councils. Each town community council has got a list of the proposals to come back to us directly as to any concerns and indeed do they agree or disagree with the proposals. And that will then be very much part of the dialogue moving forward.
Yeah, so can I just very quickly come back on that? We have, would an officer be allowed to implement a ticket, because that's what the hope would be, on what we would call that trustee's land? We have lots of signs, please leave your please control your dog, please lead your dog on leads, no dog fouling, but unfortunately there are a minimum amount of dog owners that completely disregard that. As much as we've had football matches discontinued and cancelled because there's not enough people to clear up the field after dogs have been left on there. So it is a massive amount. It is a massive problem on that field, and that's all I'd like to say. Really, I know in the past this has been continual discussion on town council, and so much so that members of the public have addressed the issue to the local police. And the police have always told us, unless there's a bylaw, nobody can do anything. So where would a bylaw come in, if at all? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Stephen. So public space protection order will set out exactly the areas that is covered. So there may be 50 or 100 dog exemption areas or leads areas, and they will be set out, number one, on the council's website, but number two, by explicit signage at the entrance to each area. So there should be absolutely no confusion if you're entering a play area or a field as to do rules, do offence, do potential offences apply. Because if that isn't clear to members of the public, then it's going to be an easy defence for people to say, well, I did not know. So that can't be the case. So that's where we've included in the report, there will be the resource implication is one of signage. So if an area is agreed, a dogs and leads area or a dog exemption area, you would expect at the entrance, at the exit, if there's a different exit, but that is highlighted by clear, explicit signage.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Did you want to come back in there?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, lovely. Councillor Callard, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation as well. At the outset, I'd just like to say that I support this, but I guess, and you may have answered some of these queries with your answer to Councillor McConnell, regards enforcement. I wonder if you had a little bit more information about what enforcement was available. You mentioned authorised officers and touched on police officers and potentially parking enforcement officers as well. Do we know how many officers, authorised officers, we have in the county, or what the budget is and able to support enforcement for this? Because although, as Councillor McConnell mentioned, this is a good idea to encourage dog owners to be responsible. If we don't have that enforcement there, it's likely to be unsuccessful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carrott. At this time, the authorised officers across environmental health and the Waste and Street cleaning sections. This is for the current designation order that's in place under the Dogs Fouling of Land Act. I don't think there's going to be scope to substantially increase budgets to take on enforcement officers, but that's obviously to be considered or one option to be considered in the future. But if we look at the departments and directorates that have been included or have helped produce this report, we're talking about environmental health, waste and street cleaning, the estate section, the leisure department, cemeteries. There's absolutely no reason why there can't be authorised officers in each of those sections moving forward. But certainly the core, I would suggest, of the authorised officers coming from environmental health. We've got 5 environmental health officers in total. We've got a number of officers potentially in waste and street cleaning who could be authorised, and we've got our, as you said, civil parking enforcement officers, of which I think we've got 4 or 5. So potentially, certainly, there could be a number of officers authorised who could act then on intel. One point I would make, and from experience, certainly 10, 12 years ago, we tried to dedicate our technical officers to proactive patrolling in the county. And proactive patrolling for dog fouling really is not cost effective and it's not efficient, because we know the majority of offences probably happen when there's nobody else around. So when somebody's walking their dogs very early in the morning, late in the evening, under the cover of dark in winter, and they can't see anybody around, that's potentially when people don't pick up. So it really is making sure we've got authorised officers who can act on intelligence where we get complaints from members of the public and information from members of the public. I hope that helps, Councillor Card.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Louise Brown.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, this obviously is an important area, you know, particularly considering what can happen to children if, you know, dog feces get in their eyes or mouth or whatever, because obviously there can be serious consequences. I'm not, I think some of the things that I've been thinking about have been already answered, but I just wanted to clarify that it seems as if once there is a public spaces protection order in a particular area, whether it's on council-owned land or it's by trustees for town councils or community councils, then authorised officers from MCC or police community officers could actually enforce. But how will the public actually know that these are authorised officers, and what will be the reporting mechanism? Is there going to be any specific reporting mechanism for the intel that you've been mentioning before, when you know, community councillors or any other member of the public notices a particular dog fouling problem? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Chair, I hope it's okay for me to come straight in and answer the question.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Well, I think it should be recognised that our officers, certainly in environmental health, have been carrying out enforcement for decades, I would say. Unfortunately, I've been here fortunately, I've been here for decades, and throughout that time, our officers carry out enforcement, and so well practiced and well versed in it. And first thing that we do when we approach dog owners is explain who we are now, show our authorisation. So our officers don't have to be in uniform, and indeed for something of this nature, perhaps best that they're not in uniform, because again, you know, are people going to pick up after the dogs, etc.? If they see a uniform officer around or follow the rules, probably they're more likely to do so. So yeah, our officers are well practiced. There will, of course, be training needs if we agreed down the line that authorised officers will need to come from other sections, for example, from the Waston Street cleaning section. And again, that can be done in-house, just to set out exactly what the officer should do and say. Environmental health, as Dave touched on earlier, a few years ago we undertook the training of the police community support officers, and again that was done in-house, led by myself, and it's fairly simple and straightforward to do. So there are a number of set procedures that need to be followed, of course, so members of the public are aware of who approaches them and exactly what they are saying. Hope that answers, helps answer the question, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I think it's the sort of thing. Would they show their Monmouthshire County Council ID, you know, photo card, or would they actually need some sort of card to show that they were authorised to do this sort of thing? You know, to go for an enforcement kind of operation, you see, because obviously, you know, you may get members of the public who, you know, particularly if you're asking for a fine, who don't want to give their name or an address or anything of that nature. So I'm just wondering about the actual practicalities of it. I mean, obviously, police community support officer is in a uniform, and that obviously clearly identifies them as an authorised person to take on any enforcement, and that's the sort of thing I was wondering about, and whether or not there was. Obviously, members of the public can email. Normally through the contact at Monmouthshire about concerns about particular things, but I just wondered whether there was going to be a separate email address or any publication where there could be sort of like like crime reporting, anonymous crime reporting, that sort of thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. So quite simply, at this moment in time, which I would expect to carry on, an officer would approach somebody who they believe to have committed an offence, introduce themselves, explain that they're an authorised officer. I would not expect them to show them the authorisation from the council or head of public protection, etc. At that time. If the member of the public is issued with a fixed penalty notice, the fixed penalty notice would clearly set out where appeals could be made and contact numbers, contact emails, etc.
Thank you, Hugh. And we've got Councillor Bryn next.
Thank you for bringing this to us today. I agree with the Dogs Trust comments on the importance of owners having the opportunity to provide their pets with off-lead exercise. I have a dog myself, and I can wholeheartedly affirm that the dogs benefit hugely from having the opportunity to run as fast as they can to let off steam. However, the key thing here is that this needs to occur in inappropriate areas, and children's parks and schoolyards are certainly not suitable for these kind of things, though I do think the inclusion of marked sports fields perhaps needs further scrutiny. But can officers tell me, is there any evidence that signage has a significant effect on behaviour, or are regular campaigns more effective? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bryn. I'm not aware of evidence about signage and the effectiveness of signage. What I do know is that we need to do it. We've got to make the rules clear to people. If a parcel of land, plot of land is a dog exemption area or dogs on leads area, it has to be crystal clear to members of the public. What I will add is when many of our neighbouring local authorities, Blaen y Gwent, Rhondda and Taff, Torfaen, they have these public space protection orders in place. I visited a park in Pontypridd fairly recently. The signs are clear as to exactly what you can do and where with regards to your dog. So it's clearly an important facet. One point I will make is that you, for example, you may go in Bailey Park at the moment, and because I'm based in Abergavenny, you'll see signs from the last 20, 30 years which have been put up there. Even perhaps from Criccower Rural District Council, I don't know if they've been taken down now, but they certainly used to be there. And all sorts of signs about dogs. And this will be a useful opportunity to take down those signs and to have one clear message, which would be the signage at the entrance and the exit as to what the dog controls are in place. For a larger park, which may have a play area, or the majority of a park may be fine to take your dog on, or maybe fine to have your dog off a lead, but there may be just a certain location where you've got to have a dog on a lead, or a certain location where you can't take your dog. The signage again will be clear, and it can show a map of a park, and it can show where the leads areas are and where the exemption areas are. As I said, I've seen a number of these work for our neighbouring local authorities, and they seem to be pretty effective.
Just to add, I think obviously it'll be part of an education awareness campaign as well. So as soon as we introduce the PSPO, so we're working our way through it. It's an incremental process. Certainly work with comms team then to say this is the expectation. It's on the website. That's what you can expect now with PSPOs, to explain it and then to revisit it. So I think it's a matter of maintaining momentum. Often things, and then it's, a bit of helter-skelter of activity, isn't it? So I think it's certainly backed up with a comms campaign to say it is important. I think it's improved, and I remember talking to Councillor Griffiths, before the meeting, wasn't it? That I think things have improved significantly over the decades. Not disclosing our ages, but certainly things have improved. I think in terms of high streets dog fouling, it's just a matter of building on that, isn't it? I think play areas, as members have flagged, is a particular key issue, isn't it? So I think we'd certainly keep encouraging people to comply. That's the best way of compliance, is getting people to change attitudes. It's about attitudes and behaviours, and I'm a dog owner myself, and certain things that you and I wouldn't do, but it's getting our message across to all the other dog owners out there. So that's the intention.
One final point on that. As I said, this is really about collaboration. We were pressed into doing this work. Pressed is perhaps the wrong word, but I've used it, by the town and community councils through Give Dog Found a Red Card. We felt it had gone so far with raising awareness, needed a little bit more power to the elbow. And that's what this is about. And it gives the opportunity then for the town and community councils about local solutions to local problems to turn to their the local dog owners. Let's face it, a vast majority are compliant, but to make it clear to the local community, well, look, this now is in place, and this is what we should be doing. And if there are any exemption areas or any leads areas, to reinforce that. That's why 2.3 members consider and comment on the council's current considerations of engaging with town and community councils to agree that there'll be a final list for the draft PSPO is so important. If I can make one point, because it hasn't been raised yet, but it is there as a recommendation for members to consider and decide, is in 2.2 on the potential inclusion of draft PSPO of the issue of should we be requiring people to carry dog bags and an offence not to be carrying dog bags. Hope you don't mind me mentioning that, Chair, but it is an important point that it needs members' consideration so that we know whether or not to include that in the draft PSPO.
I think it's vitally important that it is included. If you're not carrying provisions to pick up after your dog, then you obviously don't have the intentions to do so. I know there are many town and community councils that are putting dog waste oh god, I can't find my words. Like
dispensers.
Dispensers. Thank you, Councillor Bryn. Thank you for not leaving me suffering there any longer. But you shouldn't rely on that. I remember one like to contribute towards that.
Chair, yeah,
Councillor Lucas. Yeah.
Absolutely agree. But what happens if said dog uses more than one, and if you get my drift, you run out? I mean, I know, is that just going to be the excuse? Which, yeah, okay.
It can happen, can't it? You know, as a dog owner, we've all been caught short, and I've had to drive back to where the dog did his business. Hugh, are you able to come in there? How will you handle situations like that?
It's been raised already in the discussion in the department's an interesting one, isn't it? And from my perspective, consistency of enforcement is really important. So we will have people saying, well, you know, my dog's already, an officer approaches a person and a dog walker, and they say, well, my dog's already gone once or twice, and put the dog mess in the bins already, so no, I don't have anything. Every case of enforcement, there has to be judgment. Authorised officers are not robots going around. There has to be discretion. There has to be judgment. But it does present an issue for consistency for our officers, because it would be all too easy for our officers to listen to anything that's been said and say, yeah, okay, we understand. So I think every case would need to be taken on its merits. I would say, though, you know, again, as a dog owner myself, we would expect a dog owner to carry an appropriate number of bags. It's so, where you get the attachment to leads now, don't you, where you have a roll of the dog bags. So if our officer approach a person, they say, well, look at my roll, it's empty. Well, yeah, you can understand that if they say, well, I just took the last one off. I didn't know it was the last one. So I can envisage cases where there are genuine reasons. It will present some issues for our officers, but again, our officers are experienced, and they will need to exercise their discretion. They may, for example, be acting on intelligence, but so-and-so regularly allows a dog to foul, they never pick up.
Repeat offenders.
And if we approach that person, they say, oh, I've used my last bag, well, are they going to listen to that then? So probably not in that sort of situation.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. Forgive me for my comments, echo many of the points raised by other members this afternoon. I very much welcome and endorse wholeheartedly the proposed public space protection order in full. And like Councillor McConnell, I believe Councillor Callard and I have a meeting of our own community council later this evening, and I'm pleased to note that at the last meeting of the community council, I believe that members endorsed in full the proposals for both the dogs on lead areas and dog exclusion areas to be applied to the King George V field in Gavilan, the Centenary field from memory in Llanfoist, as well as the Owain Glyndŵr field in Llanellan, as well as the proposals for the dog, the amendments to the dog fouling PSPO in full, which as I say, I'm wholeheartedly in favour of. As I think others have commented, robust enforcement is going to be crucial here to maintain the public's confidence, and I appreciate it might be a little premature to speculate about the detailed resource implications, and we will get those, no doubt, following the successful conclusion of the consultation period. But I would remind members and note that in the latest budget discussions, when we approved the budget last month, there was, from memory, circa 20k identified to support officers to more aggressively pursue fixed penalty notices, admittedly in the context of fixed penalty notices against those who did not pay their council administered car park charges. But I just wonder whether it is the expectation of officers here present, without necessarily being drawn on the specifics. I appreciate that might be a little bit premature, but is it your expectation that similar budget or similar resource would need to be found to adequately support officers to pursue those fixed penalty notices, and to give, as I say, the average voter, and to give local residents that that the scheme will be successfully administered. And as an aside, I also wasn't entirely clear from the paper presented whether there were any wider impacts or read across to the current operation of the dog waste contract that's being administered on behalf of town and community council. So perhaps officers can give a bit more context and clarity on that question as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Hugh?
Thank you, Councillor Davis. No, so this report does not touch on the dog waste collection aspect at all. So that's point one. As to the enforcement and would additional resources be needed, I would go back to my earlier point to say that I don't believe proactive patrolling is needed or would be efficient or would be effective in delivering enforcement of this. So if I was given a pot of money to say, well, employ another officer or two and report back on how many fixed penalty notices have been issued, it would be, I would have my concerns of being able to demonstrate efficiency and effectiveness. I really think it's a matter of the process, raising awareness, the signage being clear and explicit so people know what they should do, backed up by town and community councils, working through Give Dog Phone a Red Card, reinforcing that message on a regular basis. And then where offences happen, as I said, working on intel, working on, there will be, for example, example, action days that we carry out at the moment, maybe 3, 4, 5 action days throughout the year, where we can pool resources, and then there will be proactive patrolling. But beyond that, it really is, I think, a matter of working on intelligence, working on complaints. And I'm hoping that going through this process, we'll see the complaints drop, certainly about dog fouling. And where people see the dog exemption areas or dogs on leads areas being breached, I do feel that we'll be getting, as officers, that message loud and clear. From town and community councils, from members of the public, and we can then act on that information. So, for example, if somebody is reported such a name and such address regularly breaching in an exemption area, I don't think it needs to wait until we catch that person. An authorised officer can write to that person. We can approach that person and say, well, look, concern's been raised. You need to be aware of this. So I do feel that when we're looking at enforcement, there are a number of options there, and do we need a pot of money to deliver that successfully? I would suggest not at this stage.
I think, I don't know, Chair, can I come in there?
Yeah, of course.
As you'd anticipate, it's been part of my role to ask the question, what are the resource implications? And I think what I've learned from that discussion is that at the time when we move to implementation, and there's some way to go to get this order in place first, I don't think it can succeed without investment in effective signage. You can't expect anyone to be able to issue orders if the public have not been warned. And I've seen figures in papers that we may be talking 20,000 or whatever investment in signage. And I think as a council and as an executive, we're going to have to face up to that as we time implementation. Beyond that, I've been persuaded thus far that with sensible training, sensible programme of authorisation of all the people we've got on the ground, there should not be a revenue implication on staffing. My own experience in another local authority, 10 years ago, we rolled this out. Whereas the existing signage and schemes have got a sort of voluntary look to them, and that's inhibited their effectiveness. Once you get this order in place, the amount of self-policing, people feel it's legitimate for them to police their neighbours, if you like. And the local rugby club was very robust in policing its grounds, and the soccer club as well, once that signage was in place and the legitimacy of their actions was known. And so I think we can learn an awful lot from elsewhere, but signage will be very important.
Thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Strong.
Thank you. And Hugh, you actually addressed one of the things that I wanted to make. I was kind of thinking it's about behaviour change. You've talked quite a lot about intelligence gathered from all sorts of sources, and also, not waiting for the event to happen, but to actually, and I was thinking about maybe warning letters, or, even if somebody hasn't got the relevant sort of receptacles about their person, they could be given a warning letter or some sort of prompt to make them aware of it. The other thing I wanted to say, I was quite reassured. I mean, we live within touching distance of the country park in Caldicott, so I'm quite aware that it's quite a big expanse. There are play areas, there's a soccer field, so it is lovely to be able to let the dog off, and I'm a dog owner, to let the dog off to sort of run free, but there are also areas that he needs to be on the lead, or you need to make sure that he's not in the play area as well. So local knowledge, working collaboratively with our town and community councils, I think is key to all of this, and actually working together to make sure that it's about behaviour change and actually making it safe for, our youngsters that are able to play without the fear of becoming ill because of dog faeces, basically. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, and I'll be very brief because I've already spoken once. Specifically about the question was asked whether we wanted to discuss the matter of making it an offence not to carry the bags and the implications of it. I think it's a really good idea, because it's going to be about the communication. So if you let people know in advance that this is going to be the case, then people like me who occasionally are empty-handed when it's no longer a problem will just know to carry a few more. That's no big deal. It does make enforcement much easier because you don't have to catch somebody in the act, as it were, or the dog in the act. You can just approach someone and say, do they have the bags? So just for that practical reason, I think it's a really, really good idea.
Lovely. Okay, so I would like to thank members for your scrutiny of this report today and for showing your support to the recommendations outlined in 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. Members raised concerns around how can we ensure robust enforcement, how will controls affect trustees of open spaces, resource and budget for enforcement, how will the public identify the enforcement officers, and how will intel be received? There's questions around, do we know how effective signage is on behaviour? And will there be any resource implications? I think it's vitally important we continue to raise awareness around picking up after your dog and work with many partners and stakeholders to tackle the issue, but equally important to offer dog exclusion zones for other members of public. Members of the public and town and community councils will welcome the recommendations outlined in this report, as we know it's a very emotive subject, especially on neighbourhood social media accounts, but something we as councillors receive a large number of complaints on. I'd like to thank you, Dave and Councillor Griffiths, for discussing this report with us today, and we look forward to welcoming you back next year. Thank you. I will now allow members to take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll be back to move on with our agenda. Thank you. Okay, welcome back everyone. We will now move on to item 6, Mono Street design, to scrutinise the proposed design for Mono Street following the community engagement and consultation. Paul, would you like to do a bit of an introduction?
Yeah, thanks very much, Lisa. And again, I'll provide an introduction. The report will be presented primarily by Dan. I'd like to put this report, it's one street in one town, a very important street, a very important town, but put it in the context that what we do with our towns is absolutely essential to the quality of life of the citizens that we're engaged with. And we all know that through our email chains and the approaches we get. People are always, and rightly, deeply concerned about the experience of their town centre, the social experience, the feel-good quality or the lack of a feel-good quality that they get from their towns. I've also learned, you're beginning to get a sense of the breadth of my portfolio. It's dog feces and town centres and the economy and planning. My conversations with businesses and potential business investors, what I'm learning is that a key factor in their investment decisions, are they going to invest in Monmouth or anywhere in Monmouthshire, has a significant amount to do with how they appraise the quality of the town where they're going to locate. That is important to them, the reputation for their business, the lifestyle of themselves and their employees. So getting this right is important for that postbag that we all have. It's important for the quality of life, but it's important for the Monmouthshire economy, and not just the businesses on the high street, but those who are seeking to locate around. We often describe Monmouthshire as a rural county. There's a sense in which that's valid, but equally valid is the description that is that we're a county of small towns. And even those who are living in the hinterland of the towns value the quality of life in those towns to a very high degree. As I say, this report is focusing on the main street that runs through Monmouth Town, Mono Street. Significant changes took place to this street during the COVID pandemic. Significant sums of money were made available by Welsh Government to make adjustments to high streets in order to allow trading to take place in the environment of the pandemic. Those adjustments need to be replaced. We're not entirely sure when. They're being monitored very closely and very precisely. There'll come a time when they become unsafe. They're temporary. And we need to be ready to replace them when that happens. But we're not sure on the timing. And there's going to be a balance to judge between ensuring that we have the funding available at the right time, and that time being determined by how quickly the arrangements we currently have are deteriorating. All that becomes important because alongside your current consideration on the report you've got on Mono Street, we've already started an exercise with the Town Council, which many of you are aware of in other parts of the county, the placemaking plan exercise, where we work with local residents, local businesses, local groups, with the town councils to revision the whole town. And the question's often been put to us, well, why have you considered Mono Street in isolation from the placemaking exercise? And the answer is that it is regrettable that we've had to do so, but we have had to do so because it could become an urgent need to act on Mono Street even before the placemaking plan is finished. But we're not sure of that. It could be that the existing arrangements will last, the placemaking plan goes apace, and then we can marry the two sets of consideration together. So there'll be a flexibility and an agility if the timings allow that to take place. I've learnt of it in all parts of Monmouthshire, that the arrangements we put in place, that were put in place, I wasn't here at the time, during COVID, could not have the degree of public engagement that we would normally like to have. The council had to act quickly in the interests of business. And in looking beyond that, what we've all been wanting to do, and I've been very, very eager in particular, is to have an exercise where the people of Monmouth feel that now this is their project. It's not a council project. It's not being done to them. They are doing the urban design with the council as a facilitator. That's what we've been trying to do. It's not easy, and certainly haven't taken everyone with us. But I think the attempt to work with local people has been very creative and very genuine. And I know many members of this committee, Jane on the screen, Emma in the room here, Catherine on the screen, have been part of the series of workshops that we held in the town to develop a design. And Dan will take you through much of that process. But I was enthralled by the exercise. I'm always suspicious when I meet an expert who tells me what I think I want. What I found here was that we had experienced people in urban design who were genuinely listening and recreating the plan as the result of that listening. So every time one workshop followed another, every time there was a series of interviews, meetings with local businesses, the plans would come back in a changed form. They evolved as a result of the dialogue. And that I found very refreshing. At the end of that process, we took the design that had evolved, we put it into public exhibition space, and we asked the whole of Monmouth Town to give a view. Over 500 people have done so, and Dan will take you through the results of that. Many will say, well, it's only 500, there'll be 10,000 people living in the town. Yeah, I would have liked them to have been more, and we can learn from that. But I think you could bet your bottom dollar that if the proposals were fundamentally wrong, you would have had 5,000 responses rather than 500. So people are more likely to respond to something that they disagree with rather than something they agree with. So maybe there's some reliance we can put on that. So we've been through all that, but it's not a finished exercise. We will learn from the scrutiny today. We will learn from the placemaking exercise that's continuing to take place, and what we'll seek funding on will adapt as we go along. So over to Dan.
Thanks, Paul. So the report that you've got sets out proposed public realm and active travel improvements for Monastery in Monmouth. It describes the process of developing that scheme, the design development and consultation that's been done on that scheme over the last 2.5 years or so, actually. And then it gives a bit more detail on the findings of consultation that we've done with stakeholders, with businesses, with residents over the last 6 months. If I thought it might be useful for me to give a bit of an overview now of that design process of the proposal itself, talk you through what is actually proposed in Mono Street, and then give you some headlines from the results of the consultation that we've done recently. In terms of kind of context of the drivers for this piece of work, as Paul said, as you all know, Mono Street, it's the main high street, the main shopping area for Monmouth. Its public realm is getting a bit tired. It's starting to feel a bit run down. There are parts of it that are beginning to require repair or replacement. It's rather cluttered from a kind of accumulation of street furniture that builds up over the years. It's also dominated by vehicles and by traffic. Most of the space is still given over to highway or or to vehicles, which has implications in terms of safety, air quality, ease of movement for people who aren't in vehicles, but more generally than that, implications for the kind of quality of the experience of being in that place, for the kind of amenity of being in that place. And there's a related point that there probably isn't enough space, enough provision for pedestrians or for cyclists. More generally, in terms of drivers for this, we came across it very widespread concern in the consultation and in discussions with stakeholders more generally about the economic future of Mono Street and of Monmouth town centre. Now, lots of the challenges that Monmouth faces are obviously shared with every town centre, every high street in the UK. So, thinking about internet, out-of-town shopping, changes in the way we shop, especially since the pandemic, things around business rates and rent, more recently the kind of impact of the cost of living crisis. Nevertheless, there is concern that Monmouth is kind of faring less well in managing those challenges than some other places, certainly than other places in Monmouthshire, and there is some evidence to support that. The issue that is brought up most frequently is the real concern about the level of vacancies in Monmouth town centre, the level of empty shops, which on a recent count was around 20%, which is the highest in the county and a bit above the average for high streets in Wales. And then finally, in terms of the drivers for doing this work, now Paul's already talked about the temporary COVID measures that were introduced a couple of years ago. As he said, those will not last forever and will require replacement at some point in the not too distant future, whether it's in the form proposed here or in some other way. Clearly, there's not a single, Paul has already talked about this, there isn't a single intervention that will address all of the challenges that any town centre faces, and there's certainly no single intervention that would solve all of the problems that we've talked about in Mono Street around traffic and active travel, dealing with the kind of long-term impact of the COVID interventions, and then those broader issues around the economy. And as Paul says, we're working on a placemaking plan with Monmouth Town Council, which will give us an opportunity to think a bit more broadly about those issues and about what we collectively with the Town Council and with other stakeholders can do. That said, there is a substantial and a growing body of evidence that investment in high-quality public realm schemes that prioritise walking and cycling in the way that this proposal does bring benefits in the ways that you'd expect around quality of the environment, around well-being, health, safety of people in the street. But those kind of interventions also deliver really positive impact in terms of economy. They improve the economy of the places where that investment is made. And there's some references in the report to more detail on that if people are interested. So the objectives of this scheme, these proposals for public realm and active travel improvements in Mono Street, are around supporting Monmouth as a destination, stimulating the local economy, creating an environment in the town centre in which local businesses can thrive, and doing that by creating a safer, more pleasant environment for pedestrians, for cyclists, for wheelchair users, which, as I said, is proven to have benefits to the local economy as well as the kind of more obvious factors. So, as I say, colleagues have been working on this scheme in one form or another for around 2.5 years, since the end of 2020, and that work has been done in 3 phases, and I'll just talk very briefly about those. So the first phase looked at a kind of a long list of options for Mono Street. That was done at the end of 2020 and included some quite radical proposals, so looking at potentially a one-way system, looking at pedestrianisation. Those weren't proposals that were taken forward. And then early last year, there was a second piece of work looking at a short list of options that had been brought forward from that first phase. And they all looked in different ways, the options on that short list, different ways of improving the environment for pedestrians and for cyclists while maintaining two-way traffic in Mono Street. Both of those phases in 2020 and last year included stakeholder and public consultation. There's more information on them in the report, and I'm happy to pick anything up in questions, but I'll focus on the more recent work that we've been doing, which is the third phase of the design development, developing the preferred option. So the recommendation coming out of those earlier 2 phases was to focus on what is effectively an amended version of the temporary COVID layout that's in place in Mono Street now. So it's about creating a pleasant and safe environment for people on foot or cycle, which encourages people to visit more often, spend more time in Mono Street, but doing that maintaining two-way traffic and maintaining some degree of parking. We appointed Roberts Limbrick, architect and urban designers based in Newport, to help us with that. And at the core of the work that we've done over the last 6 months has been a really extensive programme of engagement and consultation that's about, one, making sure that the final design was based on as clear as possible an understanding of the needs and the preferences of a wide range of stakeholders, and then with the aim of building a consensus around a proposed scheme. And there's an overview of that in the report, and then some more detail in the consultation report that you've got at Appendix 3 to the report. That included, as Paul has said, a series of pretty hands-on design workshops with stakeholders, initially looking at the kind of design principles, then reviewing iterations of the design through the process. As well as that, there were 2 rounds of detailed one-to-one consultation with businesses. Firstly, to understand their requirements from Monastery, their needs, their priorities and concerns. And then a second phase where we talked to them about a draft of the design and got their really detailed feedback on that. And then, in addition to that, the public consultation that Paul has mentioned, so drop-in sessions, a design exhibition, and a survey. I'll give you some headlines from the consultation in a moment, but if I may, Chair, I'll just share the design proposal so that I can talk you through what we're looking at here. Bear with me a moment.
Yes, by all means, Daniel. Thank you.
Thanks. So hopefully you can all see that. I don't know how well you can read the detail of that concept plan. You've also got that in your papers in Appendix 1, the proposed concept design. But what you can see there, just kind of take you through some of the key features. You've got the extended pavements, which create more space for pedestrians, more space for movement. But it's also creating more space for what you might call dwell, creating places for people to pause, rest, to spend time in the street. And those extended pavements also mean that there's more room for businesses to spill out onto the street. That happens to some degree already with hospitality businesses. We'd like to enable more of those businesses to do that, and other types of businesses also to kind of bring their business out onto the street in a way that can activate Mono Street as a place. There are more pedestrian crossings spread out across the street so that wherever you are in Mono Street, there's a pedestrian crossing, an opportunity to cross that's nearby. Trees and landscaping, which is partly about creating a pleasant environment, partly about amenity, but those are also really important for our drainage and our biodiversity strategies, which are elements that we have to include in any scheme like this. Dedicated loading bays for businesses spread evenly along the street. Businesses almost universally told us that the existing arrangements just don't work for them, so there's an improvement there. But we've also got short stays of general parking and disabled parking also spread out evenly along the street. And we're looking at whether a couple of the cafe seating areas can be operated on a seasonal basis so that they can provide additional parking in winter as well. Also got bike parking, again spread out along the street, significant increase in the existing provision, and for a range of bikes. So there's room for larger bikes, bikes with buggies, carts, those sorts of things. All of that is done in a way that maintains two-way traffic, so there's no impact on the kind of capacity of Mono Street as a mechanism for delivering traffic. And what's proposed here is a complete renewal of the public realm. So although it's a version of the existing COVID measures, all of the issues that have arisen from the temporary measures, so for example, the ponding that arises when there's heavy rain, uneven footways, some of the additional clutter that's been introduced would be addressed through this. And so the scheme is trying to strike a balance between different users, different needs, different requirements in Mono Street. You've got in your, again in Appendix 1, towards the end, there are some artist impressions. So I'll just run through those quickly, which might give you a bit more of a sense than the plan does of what this might feel like. So there on the right, you've got a view looking south down Mono Street from the post office. Again, looking south, and then on the right there, an artist impression of the central space near the existing pedestrian crossing. A couple there looking north from the bottom of Mono Street, so one from eye level, and one a sort of bird's eye view of the street looking north, which gives you a sense of the kind of total impact. And then finally, a couple of the proposals as Mono Street joins Blestium Street and how that would be managed. And it's a quick whiz through, but you've got them in your report if you'd like to have a closer look at those. So in terms of the consultation response, it was an extensive consultation. There's lots of detail. I won't go through all of that. I'll give you the headlines, but there's more. We can come back to it in questions, or there's more in the consultation report that's with the report that you've seen. In terms of the public consultation, as I said, that was a series of drop-in sessions. There was a public exhibition that ran for 3 weeks or so, and a survey that people were able to do online or by picking up a copy in town. We had just under 500 people through the doors of the drop-in sessions over 2 days, and 520 odd responses to the survey. And what we found from that, the kind of headline finding, is broad support for most aspects of the design proposal. I'll just bring up a chart which kind of gives a summary of that. So when you take out the don't knows, which are shown in yellow on that chart, generally for most of the questions that we ask people about whether or not they liked aspects of the design, it's kind of 60-40 in favour. So for example, 51% against 36 agreeing that it provides a better place to spend time, 62% against 25 that it makes it easier to cross the street, makes it easier to explore the town centre, and so on. The question on parking there I'll highlight because that was more evenly balanced, 42% supportive of the proposals, 43% opposed. It's worth saying that when we talked to people in the drop-in sessions and looking at some of the comments that came through on the survey, there are certainly people who would like to see more parking in Mono Street, but there are also people who would like to see less than is proposed here. There are plenty of people who would like to see no general parking at all, focus on parking for disabled people and loading, and then to create more space for pedestrians and others. And therefore I suspect that in the the negative response on that question on parking, we're probably seeing both of those groups. There was some interesting variation among different groups of respondents. We asked people how they get to Mono Street, and we asked them to tell us all the ways that they do that. It's quite notable that people who walk, cycle or use public transport to get to Mono Street, even if they also sometimes drive there, which almost everyone who answered the survey does, were more positive about the proposed changes than those who only said that they drive. And you can see that, I mean, those charts are in the report, but you can see that there's the kind of larger areas of green on 3 out of the 4 there. There wasn't any significant variation in responses by gender, but there was quite marked variation by age, and that rather blurry table, for which I apologise, shows answers to one of the questions. I think it's the first one about the extent to which the proposal would make Mono Street a better place to spend time, broken down by different age groups. And you can see there younger age groups in particular very positive about the proposals. I mean, overwhelming support among the youngest age group there. And curiously, the middle age group is the group that is least positive about the proposals. But generally, reasonably positive response to the specifics of the design. In terms of businesses, we had some response from businesses to the main consultation that I've just talked about, and that was fairly evenly balanced. But the main evidence that we have from our consultation with businesses is from the earlier one-to-one consultation that we did at the end of last year, the beginning of this. As I said, that was done in 2 parts. Firstly, to understand what businesses need from Mono Street, what their concerns are, and then secondly, to get their detailed feedback on a draft design. And we had a really good response to this. We engaged almost 90% of the businesses in Mono Street in the first phase of that engagement, and over 3/4 in the second phase. In that second phase, as well as giving us their kind of detailed feedback, and some of it's really granular, and we made some very detailed changes to the proposals in response to individual feedback from businesses. As well as that, we also asked them to rate the proposals on 5 core aspects of the design, and what we got from that is actually quite overwhelming support from businesses in Monnow Street. So more than 90% agreed that the proposals would make Monnow Street a better place for people, make it easier to cross and move around, supported the proposals in terms of loading and deliveries. More than 80% supported their proposals around landscaping and greening. And even on parking, which is probably the most contentious aspect of the proposals, just over 2/3 of businesses supported what we were proposing in terms of parking. So really positive from businesses there. It's worth acknowledging that that support from businesses is not universally shared and isn't reflected in the view of the Chamber of Commerce, but in general, in the consultation that we had with businesses, we got really positive responses to that. So just to wrap up then, I hope that gives a useful overview of the proposals and the process that we've been through to get to that. What is proposed here, as I've said, is a permanent version of the existing temporary layout. It's about creating a pleasant and safe environment, primarily for people on foot, or on cycle, or in wheelchairs, about encouraging people to visit and spend more time in Monnow Street, but it does that in a way that maintains two-way traffic and tries to find a balance between different types of use, different types of activity. Clearly, there are other issues that won't be addressed through this, and we can look at those through the placemaking plan, which will be an opportunity to think about some of the other projects that have been developed. So, for example, the scheme at Bestiam Street, the work that colleagues are doing on Shire Hall. Nevertheless, the consultation that we've done on this proposal shows broad support from the public for most aspects of the design and really strong support from businesses. Hope that's helpful. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Daniel. So first I've got Councillor Lucas. You have some questions?
Yeah, firstly, thank you ever so much to both Dan, Claire, and everybody involved for all their hard work. I totally get it, and I'm in a difficult position because my residents are telling me one thing, and in my heart, I think another. And part of me thinks these are wonderful ideas, and they are, but the other part of me comes back to realism as well. And I listen to my residents, and I have a mixed view on most of it, if I'm to be honest. So the things that I've come across that I've been drummed at me, firstly, I suppose the best thing to point out is, yes, it's an ideal world, and wouldn't it be lovely? But when you mentioned that about the thoroughfare of cars, it is, and this is a really important bit, a most important part of Monmouth, because we have the A40 dual carriageway to our side, and when anything happens on that, and yesterday's a prime example where we had a fire in the comprehensive school, albeit not drastic, but that wasn't the point, and we had over 8 fire engines running around here, and the whole place came to a grinding halt, smack on, in literally 10 minutes. So the importance of having another avenue for cars is paramount, and I understand you get that, but by the same time, not to have that ability, it's really, you've got to understand that cars are fundamental. And I wish we could all say different, but we need another road system, and that's not likely to happen for a while. And I'm not sure if or when or etc. But for me, we need another road system. Okay, so going on from that, the things that I've been told that are a real problem for the majority of my residents, bear in mind my residents are in Osbaston Ward, which live up on the top of the hill, is that they wish for more parking spaces. And why can't we look at herringbone parking spaces? We used to be herringbone parking, why can't it be again? Too many crossings. Well, I get the crossings, but if there's one place I think there's too many crossings, it'd be, why is there one either side of the bus station? That does seem a little bit OTT for me. Okay, my other real worry is the fact that the road is even going to be, the carriageway is going to be even narrower than it is currently. And that worries me significantly, because even now, buses turning out of the bus station onto the Monnow Street have problems. Now, I've actually gone and spoken to some of the bus drivers that regularly come out of there, and there's already photographs on Facebook, I believe, of a bus getting stuck, wedged up against the car. and yes, you've tracked it all through, and yes, in an ideal world, on paper it works wonderfully, but in real life, it's only got to take someone not parked as they should, and there's a problem. And all of a sudden we have problems. So that's a worry for me. Also, the design of the lay-bys, the parking areas, if they go in at the angles that they currently are now, which I know is only temporary, then we have other issues because it encourages other people to get into spaces that aren't technically there. So I don't really like that. I'd like that to be really looked at, please. Disabled bays. I love them, absolutely, I haven't got a problem with that. But in particular, for example, as you turn left out of the bus station, there's disabled bays there now, and they're quite wide, but they could be even wider, i.e. dip into the pavement more to give security to the disabled drivers getting in and out of their cars. That worries me a lot because I see it all the time, and I think to myself, oh my God, that's so close. So I would like the disabled car. I mean, if you go into a car park, disabled bays are wider. So they allow for that extra room for the need for wheelchairs, etc. Can that not be put in, please? Because I really worry about that. Preparing and assuming I hope we will do some changes, a lot of changes. Have we taken into thought about preparing for electric car power points and bikes, by the way, not just cars, because in 2030 we're now going to go, it won't be anything but supposedly electric cars. We need to think that. So will the cabling be laid down in preparation for that, even if they're blanked off space, blanked off nubs or whatever you want to call them, because surely we don't want to be ripping it all up once we put it all down. Yes, the other thing that comes up, 521 responses, and we have a 10,000 residents of Monmouth and approximately another 10,000 externally that use Monmouth. Now, my worry about that is we only had 521 responses, and I believe 120 of that is of people living out externally. So, and the thing about that is that we want those people to come to Monmouth, so they need the parking. Yes, we do have other parking spaces, but even now in Monmouth, we're talking about getting rid of residence parking here on Dixon Road and on St James Street and on Wanstow Road. So we're getting rid of parking left, right and centre and not providing more. And yes, we're building another car park, but that's only 32 spaces. But we actually want more people in. So please, we really do need to be aware. Now, there's 521 people that responded to this consultation. What worries me about that in particular is that on that consultation, there was no direct question. And now Councillor Griffiths has given us all assurance that he would take it forward according to what people want. Well, that is a very small number to be risking £6.1 million for an unclear justification. Now, I agree with him that sort of in that, but my wish to make sure we have given everybody the opportunity would be a simple question now. Do we want it to return to the way it was, which I don't think we do, but that's me, but whether my residents won't all agree with me by a long shot, by the way, and I've been around them all about this, and do we want to proceed forward? But we haven't asked that simple question. Do we actually want to return pre-COVID or not? The only questions we've given are, in effect, unable to answer that question. And if we could ask that question, and then it would remove all doubt, all argument, everything, and then it would be much more clearer and easier to take the arguments forward. For me, personally, that's how I would feel. And I know that I'm being asked that all the time. We were not asked that question, do we want to return? In reference to the fact it's only temporary, yes, I know it is. And we had to live with the pinch point being temporary for 9 on 12 years. Can we not wait a little longer to hopefully this horrendous crunch that we're in at the moment, crisis of living that we're in at the moment, get over that, so that it won't feel such a problem, because if we do it now, what businesses we have left, will they suffer immensely or too much and lose them? That worries me too. So yeah, disruption to business. How do we implement it without disrupting to business? What's the time scale? How are we going to manage it? Can we make sure that we manage it effectively? I know I've already said to Councillor Fuchs that if it was up to me and we were doing it, I would like to do it just after January sales and close the whole place for a month and literally whop it all, 24 hours work, whatever, and get it all done. But hey, I know in an ideal world, these things don't happen. When we also talk about this thing, it says 84% of the people travel to Monmouth by car. And that really does worry me that we are not considering that to be the biggest problem we've got. And then when we talk about crossing places, by the way, we talk about the Robin Hood and the Blessed Him Corner, and you showed a nice demographic of there being, in effect, 2 crossings there. I have no problem with that at all. The bit that worries me immensely is the fact you're taking away the room for that corner. Now we have, whether we like it or not, big vehicles come up and down that high street. And if we remove that corner and make it too tight, as with reference to the bus station coming out, it's going to be very hard and things are just going to go wrong there. So I really don't think it needs changing particularly. I think I've covered all my points, though I'm sure I haven't. Oh, one other thing, consultation, and I've raised this on many other things when we're referring to consultations, and I'd like this formally motioned or whatever I need to say to make it happen. Please, when we're having a public consultation, as we have had and we're having currently for other parts of Monmouth, reference active travel, and no doubt all over Monmouthshire, can they please go out on my Monmouthshire emails? This morning alone, I've had an email telling me what's happening as a planning application with so many miles where I live, that I would imagine we've got a huge proportion of people that we have those ability to actually access to that email system that we can write. And every time we send those emails out, for which I got 4 last week, each time it goes out, there's a link, and keep doing it and keep reminding people to take part in these consultations, because that has got to be the quickest and best way we can actually get people to say what they want. And I really feel, there we go. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Lovely.
And I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Lucas. There's some very good points that you raised. Dan?
Thank you. I'll go through those as best I can. Jane, if I miss anything, remind me and I'll come back to it, okay? So you were asking about the impact on the capacity of Monmouth Street for delivering traffic effectively. The point that you were making was about the issues that arise when the dual carriageway is closed. As I said, one of the kind of core elements of the proposal from the beginning of this piece of work that we'll be doing has been that the Monmouth Street needed to maintain two-way traffic for exactly that reason. So it's not pedestrianised, we're not creating a shared space. So the volume of traffic that Monmouth Street can deliver it will be exactly the same as it is now. As you've said, the existing situation is itself not perfect. And when one of the 2 routes is blocked, it causes problems elsewhere. But it's not negatively impacted by these proposals. You asked about the number of crossings, and that's been the subject of quite a lot of discussion. That's one of the things you may recall from the, I think you participated in all of the workshops. There were, in earlier versions of the design, more crossings. So we've taken out some of the crossings. And I think, as with everything in this design, it's about trying to find a balance. So on the one hand, in this case, not overburdening Monmouth Street with crossings, but nevertheless making sure that wherever you want to be able to cross Monmouth Street, there is a convenient and safe opportunity to cross nearby. What we, the design team, have tried to do here is to find that balance. It may be that it's not perfect yet, but that's the kind of direction of travel. You asked about, you made a couple of points about the impact of the narrower carriageway. So the carriageway in Mono Street has historically been very wide, so were a street like this being built now, it would be much narrower. That would not impact on its capacity to deliver traffic through. You can still get, Claire's telling me 6.3 metres is the proposed width, I think, which is still more than enough for 2 HGVs or 2 buses to pass each other. You anticipated my response on the issue with buses exiting from the bus station, and there's a similar point to make about in response to your question about the corner at the Robin Hood, that both of those have been tracked as you would expect. So the designers have tracked those to make sure that large vehicles can make those turns. And assuming if we were to take this design forward, we would revisit that tracking at detailed design stage to confirm that those movements can be made. As you say, if vehicles park illegally, that always has the potential to block Mono Street, or indeed any other road where vehicles park illegally. That is the case now, and that risk would not be removed through this design, although the fact that there's more kind of formal parking provision, and in particular more formal provision for loading and unloading, which is one of the things that tends to be a source of illegal or antisocial parking here, should improve that situation. Nevertheless, as always, there'll be some level of enforcement that is required. You made a point about disabled parking spaces. My understanding is that the disabled parking spaces would be wider than standard parking. That might mean that some of the adjacent standard parking spaces would also be wider, but that's exactly as you say, to create more space for disabled people to exit vehicles safely. EV charging, it's worth remembering that the existing, I think I'm right in saying that the existing short stay parking on Mono Street is for 30 minutes only, and that is, my assumption is that that would continue. I'm not sure to what extent that provides kind of a meaningful opportunity for EV charging. Nevertheless, we could absolutely make passive provision for that infrastructure to be delivered, and if there is a demand for it, if it would be useful to install it, then we could potentially deliver that as part of the scheme. If parking colleagues were here, I would defer to them to tell me what's going on in terms of EV infrastructure in car parks more generally. The impact, you asked about the impact of the changes here on people who are travelling into Monmouth from nearby areas, who are, as you say, an important constituency, an important group of people in terms of those who use Mono Street. There are, from memory, and again Claire may be able to remind me, but from memory, 600 and some parking spaces. 631. 631, there we are, parking spaces in Monmouth. And I think there's an additional 20-something that are being created in the new car park. There is no loss of parking, no significant loss of parking from memory between the existing situation and what is proposed here. And the reduction in parking from the pre-COVID situation is only a dozen spaces or so, which in the context of the 600 odd spaces elsewhere in Monmouth, most of which are very close to Mono Street, we're not talking about significant numbers. It's also the case, I think this is possibly highlighted in the report, so we asked people how often they visit Mono Street, the kinds of things that they do there and how long they stay there. And the vast majority of people are visiting Mono Street to do things which would take longer than half an hour. So the short stay parking is not really appropriate parking for most of the people who currently visit Mono Street. And I would have thought if we're trying to, if one of the objectives, not only of this scheme, but of work that we do more generally in town centres, is to encourage people to visit more often, but also spend time there, then it's that longer stay parking that's going to be of significance there. The question about the return to the pre-COVID layout was in effect asked in the consultation in phase 1 of this piece of work, so in late 2020. So one of the options that was considered as part of that was a return to the pre-COVID layout. And I think the report talks about this. The majority of respondents were in favour of options that delivered some sort of change along these lines. So that is something that we've looked at before. It's also worth saying that in the appraisal of options that's been done by consultants and by colleagues, that return to that previous layout would not address any of the issues that have been identified in Mono Street. And I also have to say there's no evidence that that would address the kind of wider concerns around the town centre economy. Finally, before I stop and you remind me which of your questions I've missed, in terms of disruption to businesses, yes, I mean, there's no way of delivering a scheme like that which would not entail some disruption to businesses. I think that's to some degree inevitable. Our job would be to make sure that we minimise that as far as possible by carefully planning and phasing the works. In terms of timescales, if this scheme were to proceed, we then move on to detailed design, which would take another 9 to 12 months, and then there's work to be done on securing funding for delivery. That question about funding for delivery will be the subject of a report that's coming to Cabinet in June, I think, so we can perhaps revisit that one at that point. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Yes,
Jane,
please.
do you want to come back in there?
Yes, please. You just referred to stage 1 of the consultation, and I have to say that was hidden beyond all belief. And stage 2 of the consultation was more than hidden. So to say that we had a fair crack of allowing people, residents of Monmouth and everybody to have a say was almost impossible to do so. So I think that's pretty unfair to say that they've already asked that question, because I would challenge you now. I could take you all around my ward and I will tell you now, they'll all tell you exactly the same. They did not know. All right. So please, could we possibly, and I'd like to see it done and then it's put to bed, could we have that done again? And a simple yes or no would suffice. And because that way it can't be argued. That's my argument for that. It cannot be argued, and we can happily stretch forward and say what's good about these ideas. And I'm not saying they're not good, because I can't disagree. But what I am saying is what I get told, and what I'm being told doesn't portray what you're presenting, I'm afraid, as much as we'd like it to. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bryn, would you be so kind to let Councillor Fuchs quickly ask her questions, because she has to leave at 4:15 to pick up her son? Is that okay?
Yeah, fine.
Oh, that's so kind of you. Councillor Fuchs, would you like to ask your question?
Oh, I really appreciate that, Chair. Thank you so much, and Councillor Bryn. So yeah, as the ward councillor for the town ward, I just want to say, first of all, thank you to Dan and Councillor Griffiths for setting the context of the works and the plans that are proposed. And I think we can all agree that looking at the design proposal, it is a really huge improvement on the confusing cacophony, I'll call it, of what is there now on Mono Street. We do, although it might be a confusing high street at the moment, it is an incredibly beautiful high street. I had visitors over from Australia this Easter, and they were bowled over by how beautiful Monmouth is and the rivers running through and everything else. But I think we can all admit Mono Street is looking tired. I was really delighted actually in town yesterday to see the new Bumble, the store Bumble that's opened up, and also there's another new store opening up really shortly. So that's really great. I'm sure there will be more, but of course it's not in the council's gift to set shops up, but it is in our gift to have a beautiful and welcoming high street that people want to dwell in. So yeah, I've spoken, like Councillor Lucas, to lots of residents and businesses in my ward, town ward. It is fair to say there are loads of different opinions, and it's interesting what Councillor Lucas said about Osbaston, because I've got at least half a dozen friends who live in Osbaston who absolutely love the proposals. And in my ward there are also people who like it and people who aren't so keen on it, but I found that probably around the same kind of numbers 60-40 in favour in general. And I think everybody wants something done. So I think it's nuanced, Councillor Lucas. I hope you don't mind me saying that, but I really do think it's nuanced, and not everybody, it's really difficult to say. I can't put hand on heart and say everyone in my ward supports it. I think it's very nuanced, but I do think actually that the consultations were really well attended. And I mean, the one on the Saturday in Monmouth was, it was vibrant and busy, and there were loads of people there. So yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it, getting all 10,000 people to comment on something. I know that from what Councillor Griffiths has told me in the past, that when they did a consultation in Chepstow, they had thousands of responses because it was incredibly unpopular, and 99% of those responses were against. So it's interesting. It wasn't a consultation like that. I think on the parking, I'd like to hear from Dan. My question is really about how many disabled spaces there are. But in the 20 years I've lived in Monmouth, I've never had a problem finding a place to park. Yeah, I can't always park on the high street, and it is convenient to be able to do it. Again, a mixed response from high street businesses, some of the ones that I talked to that actually didn't want to come to public meetings and put their views forward, but they responded to the surveys, said that actually they'd like only loading bays and disabled parking in the high street. It seems that Daniel and the team have trod a really careful line, because although there are some businesses and individuals who say that, they realise that that wouldn't be popular and that people actually want some parking in the high street. So I kind of think we've got a really good compromise here. And I take your point on blockages in the high street. I was in the high street yesterday too. And I do think those extra loading bays will help. Talking to young people, my sons are at Monmouth Comprehensive School. They like the idea of the crossings and the safety that will give, and the fact that you could cross the road in more places. I think that's great. But so I guess my message as ward councillor for this street is we need to invest in our high street. And I know the last administration started this process off. I know you started on a proposal for Blestium Street and getting rid of the infamous blimmin' toilet block. And I think this is a really good first step to restore pride in Mono Street, regenerate Mono Street. But I wouldn't want us just to be focusing on Mono Street. I really want us to think about Blestium Street, the top of town, the slaughterhouse arches, behind the market hall. All of these things we could be putting in funding applications and doing our best to really restore Monmouth to its former glory. So that's what I'd like to recommend, really. And yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fuchs. Dan, did you want to come in on Councillor Fuchs's praise for the plans, the proposals?
Just to, a couple of specific points. So yes, wholeheartedly agree that we need to look more broadly than Mono Street, and as we've talked about, the placemaking plan that we'll be working on with the town council is the kind of mechanism for doing that. Specific question on disabled parking. I think I'm right in saying that what is proposed in the scheme that we've got in front of us now is 6 disabled spaces in Mono Street, and then an additional 3 around the corner, new spaces that are created in the area near the toilet block. Having said that, there would be the scope to increase that. So, all of the proposed parking bays could, in principle, be enlarged to create disabled spaces if that was the preference. But I think that's all on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bryn. Thank you for your patience, Councillor Bryn, and allowing Councillor Fuchs to come in. It's very kind of you.
No problem. Thank you for bringing these plans to us. The project has much to commend it. Mono Street is in dire need of an injection of vitality, and much of it is currently beginning to look decidedly unloved. I particularly welcome the introduction of art into the street scene, additional seating, loading bays, and the incorporated blue-green infrastructure to replace the boxed trees and flooding issues that are a current feature of the High Street. I do, however, have a few questions regarding the objectives of the scheme and how the proposals meet them, if that's okay. Could officers please indicate how the features in the proposals meet the objectives stated? If you have that in a tabular format, that would be ideal. I know particularly the objective to improve accessibility to all with a specific emphasis on visual impairments. My main concern being the removal of the only controlled crossing on Mono Street contravenes the objective because it removes the only indicator the blind have that it's safe to cross. And encouraging shop spill out reintroduces clutter, and as much as I'd love to see more activity take place on Mono Street, I believe one of the objectives is to unclutter the High Street, so I just like reassurance that passage will remain uncluttered and the High Street and clear routes will remain for residents, particularly residents with disabilities, because I'm uncertain how this will allow more room for pedestrians on the street itself and aid street safety. One objective is for the scheme to contribute to the carbon reduction agenda and improve cyclability on the street for shopping and safer access to school and the leisure centre, but the carriageway continues to feature short-term parking on both sides and also states that it encourages optimal traffic flow as an objective, and these goals seem at odds with one another, and I'd appreciate further clarity. Another of the objectives is to improve connectivity and accessibility, and the design report refers to stronger linkages for residents. I understand why improving the access routes from the car parks behind premises on both sides of Mono Street are excluded from the proposed design scheme, but it would be very useful to see how this plan complements other schemes underway, considering the viability of the High Street and the ultimate success of this scheme is dependent on the achievement of all these complementing campaigns. And finally, could I ask if a feasibility study was conducted to ensure that the implementation of this design is feasible, taking into account the underground structures and differences in levels on Mono Street? And is it possible to have further information on expected duration of planned engineering works, should they go ahead, as soon as possible? Because we all, as Councillor Lucas has said, we all want it to have a minimal impact on the Mono Street traders. And as an aside, is it possible for you to tell me if the gateway infrastructure will include raisable bollards? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bryn. Daniel?
Thanks very much, Councillor Bryn. Just on your specific questions, I'm happy to, I don't have to hand a table which sets out how the different elements of the scheme meet the objectives, but that's something that we can provide if that would be helpful. On the other questions, on the impact of the proposals on disabled people, in particular blind and partially sighted people, there isn't a proposal to remove the existing signal-controlled crossing. So it would be, the proposal has it moved slightly from its existing location, but there would still be a signal-controlled crossing in broadly the same place, in addition to the other courtesy crossings that are proposed. And on the point about the kind of the tension between activity in the street and businesses spilling out and the reintroduction of what might be perceived as clutter, we're looking at kind of clearly demarcated, possibly through physical marks on the footway, zones in which that kind of activity could take place that are designed to make sure that there's a clear route through for for all users, but that's particularly of interest to disabled users and blind and partially sighted users. And those zones would be marked with tactile paving to make it easier for those to be navigated. In terms of the potential conflict between vehicles or motor vehicles and cycles, one of the impacts of both the reduction in the width of the carriageway and in other design features, such as the greening and so on, and the introduction of some very gentle curves in Mono Street, will be to slow vehicles down. The additional crossings are likely to do that as well, which will bring benefits in terms of the safety for cyclists. You talked about connectivity and accessibility, particularly from the sides, from either side of Mono Street. As you say, those are out of the scope of this particular piece of work, but where we know there is potential for those to come forward. So, for example, the planning application that's currently in for Hebron Hall, the chapel on Mono Street, just off Mono Street, where a connection through is proposed as part of that. We've allowed for that in the design here, and it's kind of shown as a feature. I think that's something, if, for example, other proposals for those kind of lateral connections were to come forward, over the next period when we're designing the scheme, we can make sure those are marked in the same way. More generally, I think that's an issue that the placemaking plan would certainly look to pick up about how we can improve that kind of connectivity. And the same is true of your question about the relationship, if I understood it correctly, the question about the relationship between this scheme and other pieces of work. So the Blestium Street scheme, for example, is the most obvious one. Clearly those two in particular would need to be designed effectively as a single, designed and perceived once complete as a single cohesive piece of work, and we need to make sure that in the future design development of this scheme, assuming it proceeds, and if there's any future design development of the Blestium Street scheme, that we keep that in mind, the need to make them sit together as a single piece, even if they couldn't be delivered at the same time. You asked a question about feasibility. So some initial work has been done on that, but we would normally expect to do the kind of bulk of that at the detailed design stage. And it's inevitable, and it would all be the case with any scheme like this, that there will be some changes that need to be made during the detailed design stage as the evidence from surveys and so on comes forward. So we've done that initial piece of work, but we'll do more of that in the next phase, clearly, to make sure that once we get to the point where we have detailed designs and are in a position to procure contractors, that we have a deliverable scheme. The duration of those works, I think, is probably a bit too early to be able to say with confidence. I would have thought something like this in total, end to end, probably 6 to 9 months, but clearly that wouldn't be the whole street in one go, and we'd look to take a phased approach so that the impact on businesses is minimised.
Thank you, Daniel.
Sorry, I missed the last one. Raised bollards aren't raisable bollards. Don't currently feature in the proposals, but that's not to say that they could not.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. It seems that looking through the reports, a lot of work has been done in relation to asking questions and at different stages. But it's clear that 84% of people who've answered said they travel there by car. So I was just wondering what the number of spaces was currently for both able-bodied and disabled, and what the situation would be with regard to this design. I think obviously pedestrian crossings are helpful for obviously for pedestrians and walkers and cyclists, but I just wondered whether that would actually prevent the free flow of traffic through the highway. Looking at, because the high percentage of the people who have answered that this arrived by car, the drivers as such, there isn't a terribly convincing support for this particular scheme. It's sort of there's a lot of people who disagree or in the middle. If you add those together to those who agree. And one of the things I was thinking, I'm looking at it from the perspective very externally, because Monmouth isn't my local shopping centre, and obviously the pictures make it look better. But I'm just wondering about this particular car issue, particularly when 67% of the people you surveyed, I think, said that they used it for top-up shopping. Now, if you've got a 30-minute space and you're doing top-up shopping, it's very helpful to have somewhere close, so you don't have to carry the shopping a long distance. So I'm just wondering whether or not that's been properly taken into account. the other question is about the 6.1 million that we're talking about. Where is the budget? Where are the resources for that? Because it mentions match funding, and obviously match funding would mean possibly about 3 million. So is that in the budget already? And where is the other money going to come from this scheme? In terms of I think one of the points that Councillor Lucas made was about asking the basic question again, because I understand that what's happened is because the pavements have got wider, then effectively there is a drainage issue. Now, looking at the plans here, basically it looks a lot more flat. So I think it's very important that you look at any drainage issues. Where's the water going to go in terms of the gravity and so forth? Because I've known, I mean, this isn't actually a shared space scheme, but I've known of schemes in Poynton in Cheshire that have caused a lot of problems with the surface and looking at digging it up again because of the drainage and the effect of lorries going across and breaking up the surface, and how well the side drains in relation to highways. So I think the point that Councillor Bryn raised with regard to looking at engineering and water flows and so forth is a very important point. So basically looking at the results that you've got, and a lot of people didn't seem terribly convinced that it would have a better impact on the actual numbers coming. I'm just wondering whether or not you actually do have a strong business case for this to go forward in view of the expenditure involved, and I'd be interested to hear the response on that. I mean, on a picture basis, it looks very nice, but there are obviously a number of issues that have been raised, and I don't necessarily think they've all been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Thanks. I will attempt to address some of those questions then. On the point about 84% of respondents travelling by car, it's important to understand that we asked people for all of the modes of transport that they use. So, people commonly, particularly those who live close by, may on some occasions drive into town, but might also walk or cycle, or on other occasions use public transport. So although you're right that 84% of respondents use a car to travel to Monnow Street, 61% of respondents also walk. Now, there's probably fairly significant overlap between those two, which is to say some people are sometimes cycling, sometimes walking, some people are, and also sometimes using the car. In terms of...
Sorry to interrupt, but you've actually split up your results as if they don't overlap. So, you haven't asked the question that should have been asked if you wanted to look at these in distinct categories, which you have done, is to say, what's your main mode of transport to the high street? And because you've said what methods do you use, and then you've split up the results, it doesn't actually make sense. Sorry.
I'm sorry if it's not intended to be understood in that way. So what we've done, we thought it was important to understand all of the different modes by which people travel to Monnow Street. And then we've looked at the results by all of those who said that they, for example, drive, even if they also use other modes of transport, all the people who say that they walk, even if they also use other modes of transport. And I think the variation in the responses that we get from that is quite interesting. It is worth saying, in response to your point about the response to the proposals from those who drive, that even among that, I mean, given that they're by far the largest single group at 84%, as you would expect, the responses to the proposal from those who drive is broadly in line with the overall response, which is to say people are generally, broadly speaking, in favour of most aspects of the design proposals. You asked about parking spaces. If thinking about Monmouth as a whole, as we were talking about, there are 600 and some parking spaces in Monmouth. Most of them are very close to Monnow Street. There are 33, I think, spaces in the proposal that we've got in front of us now, which is a reduction of about 12 from the pre-COVID layout and no significant reduction from the existing arrangements. In the context of that 600 or so parking spaces, that's a relatively small reduction, and clearly those, whether we're talking about 33 or 46 spaces, though the amount of parking on Mono Street has never been and never could be enough to sustain Mono Street. Mono Street has always relied on people who are travelling by whatever means but not parking on the high street. And in terms of the point that you make about top-up shopping, and that's been part of the rationale for retaining some on-street parking on Mono Street, keeping roughly the existing levels, and it comes back to this point about trying to find a balance. But it's also true, as I say, that most of the parking spaces in Monmouth are within easy walking distance of Mono Street, and therefore are accessible for most people who are doing that kind of top-up shopping. You mentioned the drainage issues that have arisen with in particular, I think, been made worse by the temporary COVID measures that are in place now. As Councillor Griffiths was saying in the introduction, those were designed and intended as a temporary measure. They were designed and installed at speed, and well, because I wasn't involved at the time, I feel comfortable saying I think it's the reasons for doing that in terms of making Mono Street more accommodating to social distancing, which was important at the time, and enabling businesses to spill out. I think we can understand why those things were done at speed. Nevertheless, that means that some of the very careful design that we would expect to do for a scheme such as is proposed here, which is a permanent scheme, perhaps wasn't possible at the time. And so those drainage issues that have arisen are very much a function of the fact that it's a temporary scheme intended to be temporary. And as I said, we would be looking to address all of those sorts of issues that have arisen from the temporary scheme in the design of a permanent scheme. In terms of costs, budget and resources, 6.1 million is an estimate that was done for a similar scheme last year, so I wouldn't want to say that that's exactly the cost that we'll be looking at here. Probably we're in the same area. As I said, there is a separate paper which will consider regeneration priorities and funding to support those for this scheme and others across the council coming to Cabinet in June. So perhaps that's one to pick up at that point.
Thank you, Daniel. Louise, would you like to come back in there?
Yeah, I wasn't quite clear where it said match funding. I wasn't quite clear where the additional funding was actually going to come from, because obviously match funding means, effectively if it's 6 million, it's 3 million from the council, and in terms of a capital cost, and then 3 million from elsewhere. And I just wanted to know, obviously this scheme has been costed, so where is the other 3 million coming from? I think that's one of an important issue. And I think going back to what Councillor Lucas has said, wanting to know the answer to the basic question from people, and you haven't answered the question as to whether it's a strong business case. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to come back on that one after questions. Sorry, Daniel, do you want to come back in there?
Yeah, sure. So on the point about match funding, without wishing to preempt discussion that will happen in the future, the likely sources of, I think the most likely sources of funding for this scheme, the match funding requirement is either 10 or 30%, depending on which source of funding we're looking at. So it's unlikely to be at the level of 50%. That discussion about how that budget is allocated is not one that we've had yet. So that's something to come back to, what we're hoping to do through the current process, and subject to your comments today and the decision when this reaches Cabinet, is to have an adopted scheme which we can then both progress in terms of design, but use as a tool for securing funding for delivery. The question, your point about the question of, well, I think what you're alluding to is a kind of a binary question about whether or not this scheme should proceed. As I said, that is a question that was effectively asked in consultation at an earlier stage. And as I said, the work that's been done subsequently shows that in terms of the objectives of this scheme, that kind of return to the pre-COVID layout wouldn't meet any of those objectives, wouldn't deliver against the objectives that have been set for the scheme.
Okay. So just to confirm, the answer to a reconsultation on that option is no.
I'm not sure that's my decision to make, but given that there have
what are members' thoughts?
3 rounds of consultation on this scheme already, it's been a very comprehensive process over 2.5 years. I think that's something to bear in mind.
Can I have an indication from members, their thoughts on that, please? I know what your thoughts are, Jane.
I think residents will get consultation fatigue. I think perhaps people just have forgotten that first question they were asked because it was such a long time ago. But the majority of the residents wanted some form of change, even if they couldn't agree on what that change was. And we've been there and done that. Surely we don't want to go back to the beginning again.
Okay. Anyone else have any views on this? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I think the point that I was making is that it's not, it is a nuanced response. It's not an overwhelming support of it if you look at the figures, and I think that's what my concern is. I would have expected higher percentages in favour of it. I mean, to me, it looks a nice scheme on paper, but I would have thought there would have been a bit more, in terms of the percentages, however you broke them down. I think if you looked at the general picture, it's not overwhelmingly in support, and the message about how it will impact and improve things in terms of footfall doesn't seem to have got through in terms of the responses that people have given on it. So I just wondered whether it was, and that's what I mean by the business case really, in terms of the public support for it. But that's just a question for people to consider, and obviously it's not my particular ward area, so I'd leave that. But I just thought it's a thought that needs to be reconsidered by the people who are local to that area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Come back on that, Chair.
Okay. Yep.
So just to say, I mean, it's notoriously difficult to engage people in consultations on this sort of schemes, and so on the basis of my experience, the response that we've had, 500 or so people through the doors in the drop-in sessions, more than 500 responses to a survey in a town the size of Monmouth is actually quite positive. It would also be unusual, very unusual, to receive an overwhelming endorsement for any scheme of this type. But what we have got is a pretty clear picture in terms of the responses, on most questions that we ask people, roughly 60-40 in favour. And what certainly was overwhelming was the response from businesses in the one-to-one business consultation that we did that I talked about earlier. There is some evidence in the report, I haven't gone over it in detail, but some evidence in the report, case studies from elsewhere, of the economic impact of these sorts of schemes that I mentioned before, which demonstrate the kind of value of this kind of activity. It may well be that is not a message that has been universally absorbed.
Okay, thank you. Ben has put in the chat that he doesn't wish to reconsult. Have any other members got any views on this? Obviously, the number of people. Yeah, of course, Jane, come in.
I'm sorry, but for me, we need just to ask a simple question, and then it's clear, and we can really step forward and be very positive in what we do step forward with. And I understand the hesitancy, but by the same token, we haven't got a strong answer to those who are against. 84% people say they get there by car, and Councillor Brown has just pointed out the fact that if you didn't ask the question correctly, if that's not the way you wanted it, but you forget there's roughly 20,000 people that we're talking about here and only 500 responses. If we could just have a yes or no question, it would make life so much easier. And to say we actually had those questions, I'm sorry, they are so long ago, it's so hidden, nobody, and I really mean this, how many people actually responded or knew about any of that? So no, that's not fair. I don't think that question has been asked. And I strongly wish for that question to be asked. And once it's asked, let's really step forward with a great positive response, because yeah, I agree, the drawings look lovely, but are they real? And just to bring up one of the things I hadn't asked, and it's come up in conversation, which is about the coach parking on Blestium. Please, I worked endlessly hard, humongous evidence to prove the need for those coach parking spaces. And if we're not careful, we'll lose those. And I don't want to lose those coach parking spaces for the tourist coaches. And also remember, even though I really want those toilets to go, that we need the bay to turn those coaches around and don't send those coaches up the high street because we don't want it. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. There's obviously some serious concern around the way the consultation has been carried out here. I think it's a bit of a split between members. So we really, I think, to make it fair, I think we need to go to a vote if we want to reconsult. Is that possible, Hazel? Are we able to put a vote in the chat bar so I can gauge what members' views are? I know some people have put their comments in the chat.
Chair, I think it would be easier just ask members individually what their desire is, whether they would support that or not. We don't tend to vote in scrutiny, we go with consensus. So I think it's only fair and transparent if we do it that way rather than through the chat. Thanks.
Okay. So members, I'll go through the attendee list. Councillor Brown, are you for or against a reconsultation?
Yeah, for just a very basic question, really.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brim?
Against.
Councillor Collard?
I'm against.
Councillor Davis?
Out of deference to Councillor Lucas and other local members, I'm in favour of reconsultation.
Okay, thank you. I'm also in favour. Councillor Lucas? Of course. Councillor Sue McConnell?
I'm against.
Councillor Stevens?
I'm against.
Okay. Councillor Strong?
I'm against because I don't think we can just sit with a status quo, so I think we need to do something.
Okay, so that's 5 against, 4 for.
Chair, can I just clarify that scrutiny tends not to vote? So what we've done is we've kind of sought your views as a committee on how you feel about going forward. So I think your original suggestion that there's a mix here, it seems pretty split to me. So I think what you can do as a committee is to do a short summary and say that actually you have mixed feelings on this and the officers need to take away the points that you've raised today, but I don't think we can, as a scrutiny committee, require further consultation to be undertaken.
Okay, thank you, Hazel. Daniel, did you want to come back in on the coaches quickly?
Yes, just briefly to say there's no current proposal, certainly not as part of this scheme, to remove the coach parking in Blestium Street, and there are no changes that are proposed in the area around the toilets that would, as far as I understand, that would prevent them turning around. We can check that.
Okay, lovely. So members, thank you very much for scrutinising this final report. Sorry, Councillor Griffiths, did you want to come back in there?
Very quickly, Chair, if that's possible. I don't know how to put my hand up in this arrangement.
It's okay.
Just to say that I've found the debate very constructive and very useful. We've deferred the Cabinet discussion on this for a few weeks, so there's going to be plenty of time, and I will want to ensure that the Cabinet report reflects as clearly as possible the range of points that have been made relating to a whole range of subjects. Councillor Bryn's point on the need to show in a tabular form the objectives and the actions, the appraisal on the cabinet, the appraisal on costs. Let's get as many of those into the cabinet report as we can, and I thank everyone for raising them. This is a challenging scheme. Councillor Lucas said at the beginning that you start from the premise that the two-way traffic has to continue. It has to be a parallel highway to the dual carriageway. Achieving that objective alongside an objective that nobody's challenged, that we want it to have more social space, to be more attractive in itself, for more people to be there and to dwell there. Matching those things together is the challenge, and the compromises will continue to be made. On the subject of consultation, whilst Councillor Bryn talked of fatigue, it's not going to end. The whole placemaking process is a process of public engagement and consultation, and I've no doubt the issues relating to the street will come up again, and we can reflect on it. What I would love to see is a project which unites Mono Street with the riverside, with other areas of the town. Whether we can get away with that will depend on how long the existing arrangements are in place and how long it will be to design something more holistic. So let's keep all that in mind. I hope you will see a report going to Cabinet which fully reflects the important questions that you've raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So thank you, members, for the scrutiny of this final report of the day. Our high streets and town centres provide vitally important functions, such as being focal points for local communities, centre point for economic activity, job creation and retention, and draw many of the visitors and tourists to Monmouthshire. Spaces for leisure and increasing places to live, and we need to continue to want to make our towns more attractive and listen to our residents' views. I will say that the number of people who engaged in these consultations was quite disappointing, and that's something we need to take away. But I'm pleased with the comments raised. There are things like it's important to maintain the two-way traffic, potentially the use of Haribo parking. Some felt that there were too many crossings. The size of disabled bays. Will cabling be installed ready for electric power points for bikes and cars? Can consultations go out on the My Monmouthshire message in emails with the link to try and increase participation? A number of members wanted us to go back to reconsultation on do we return to the pre-COVID layout? We must ensure we minimise the impact on businesses for the works. There was questions raised around tourist coaches returning, the features and how they meet the objectives, accessibility, especially for blind and partially sighted. Has a feasibility study been carried out? How we will work with the conflict between vehicles and cyclists on Mono Street. Accessibility for either side of Mono Street. There are questions around the drainage and engineering options that have been considered, and where will the 3.1 match funding be coming from? So there's a mixed view of proposals made by officers today, and I think that will probably be it shows that it's a true reflection on residents' views. So I hope officers and cabinet members will go away and consider what's been said today. I'd like to thank Paul and Daniel for presenting the report and introducing it. I will now move to item 7, Place Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme and Action List. Does anyone have any comments they wish to make? Councillor Davis.
very briefly, Chair, not to add to an already congested forward work plan, might I suggest that in light of the Cabinet members' commitment at the last full council meeting following the ratification of the budget for 2023-2024 and her commitment to work with members, particularly on reimagining the design of the community improvement team, particularly the delivery of road sweeping, litter picking, grass cutting and other much valued activities within our respective wards and communities, that perhaps that might be something we as a committee would wish to revisit and prioritise over the coming months.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Can we add that to our action list, please, Hazel?
Yep, no problem, Chair.
Lovely. And agenda item 8, Cabinet and Council Work Planner. Are there any items anyone wishes to raise? Hazel, do you want to come in there?
No, Chair, it's for noting and for members to highlight anything they might want to bring forward. So I trust that you've read it and there's nothing to note.
Lovely, thank you. And to confirm minutes. So we've got the ordinary meeting of Place Scrutiny Committee dated the 12th of January. Is everyone happy with those minutes? Yeah, lovely. Special meeting of Place Scrutiny Committee dated the 2nd of February. Yeah, okay, lovely. And our next meeting will be Thursday, the 25th of May. Can I thank you, members, for your brilliant contributions this afternoon? And I wish you a wonderful evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Chair.
everybody.